Our next speaker is a professor of behavioral economics at Duke University and author of Predictably Irrational. Please welcome Dr. Dan Ariely.
Thank you. So I want to tell you a little bit about behavioral economics and irrational behaviors that people engage in from time to time. Of course, not you, other people. And I want to start by telling you a personal story of how I got into this field. So I first became acutely aware of irrational tendencies that drive kind of important decisions when I was in hospital. I got burned quite a few years ago in an explosion, and I spent a long time in hospital, about 3 years. And one of the terrible things that happen to every burn patient is the process of bandage removal. Right? So you all must have had a Band-Aid at some point, and you all must have removed it at some point, and you must have wondered what's the right way to take it off. Do you rip it off quickly? Right, just a few seconds, but every second is going to be very painful, or do you take it off slowly? Take lots of seconds, but each second is not as painful. Which one of those two approaches is the right way? Which one would create less overall pain for you? Well, the nurses in my department thought that the right strategy would be the ripping approach. So they would grab hold, and they would rip, and they would grab hold, and they would rip, and they would continue doing so for about 45 minutes to an hour. I had lots of my body was burned. And as you can imagine, I hated this practice with passion, right? And I would often argue with them and beg them and say, hey, why don't we do something different? Why don't we take things slower? And the nurses told me two things. The first thing they told me was that they were correct, that they knew what was the right way to minimize my pain, right? And the second thing they told me was that the word patient didn't mean to butt in or intervene or make suggestions. It just meant sit there quietly and do what you're told to. Well, they kept on doing what they thought was right. And about 3 years later, when I left the hospital, I started studying at the university. And one of the most interesting lessons I learned was that if you have a question about something in life, you can sometimes create a version of it in an experiment. You can bring it into the lab and you can test it out. And you can see what really works, what's the answer to your puzzle, and maybe apply it back to life. So I was very curious about this, and this question about how to remove bandages was still strong in my mind. And although it's a more general question, if you think about an experience that lasts over time, and you say this experience would fluctuate, go up and down and so on, what's the best way to optimize it? You can create a movie, you could create anything that you could create, you can think about in this term. But originally I didn't have much money for research, so I went to a hardware store and I bought a carpenter's vise, one of these things that you put to clamp pieces of wood together. And I brought people into the lab, and I would ask them to put 2 fingers in the vise, and I would slightly crunch their fingers. I'll ask for volunteers later. We have a session. And I crunched people's fingers in multiple versions. There were short duration and long duration, high pain, low pain, pain that went up, pain that went down, all kinds of different versions of pain. And after each of those things, I would ask people, so how painful was this and how painful was that? And if you had to repeat one of the last 2 experiences, which one would you pick to do again? People answered nicely. Then, like all good academic projects, I got more funding. I moved to better methods. I got electrical shocks and heat and sounds. Real academic success. But what I learned about all of these experiments across all of these domains, including mental domains, like the pain and pleasure of losing and gaining money, was that it turns out that the nurses were wrong in multiple ways. First of all, it turns out in the trade-off between duration and intensity, duration doesn't matter as much. Intensity matters a great deal. So if you take something painful and you make it twice as long, you haven't made it twice as painful. You change the amplitude, all of a sudden, we're talking about substantial changes in experience. It also turns out that the progress of pain over time matters a great deal. If you start from a low pain and you end to a higher level of pain, it's much worse than if you start at a high level of pain and decrease over time. And the nurses, partly for convenience purposes, started at my feet and ended up at my head, which gave me the wrong path of pain over time. And finally, it turns out that for long experience of pain, this doesn't apply to bandages, taking breaks is very good because it allows you to recuperate some of your energy and kind of be able to attack the next wave of pain. And the question is, why couldn't the nurses get it, right? How could they be wrong? By that time, I took already economics, introduction to economics, And I knew that according to economic theory, everybody was supposed to make the right decisions all the time, especially if you have good intentions, you plan it, and you have lots and lots of experience. And the nurses had all the good ingredients to make the right decision. Plenty of experience, good people, wanted to make right decisions, important decision, more important for me than for them, but still important for them as well. And nevertheless, they were getting it wrong. And it wasn't as if sometimes they were getting it wrong one day and another time they were getting it wrong a different way. No, they were getting it wrong in a consistent, systematic way, and all of them were getting it wrong in the same way. And from that point on, I started looking at all kinds of ways in which we make mistakes in decisions. So let me tell you about something else. You know, the good thing about doing research on irrationality, there's just a lot of it, right? So it's not a topic that you end up having a problem chatting about things. So let me tell you a little about cheating. So I became interested in cheating when Enron kind of erupted to the field, and you must be familiar with the story. And the thing that got me thinking was, how do we think about Enron? Do we think about a story where we had 3 bad apples, 3 people who kind of in some sense designed a corrupt system? Or do we think about it as a more general problem that doesn't necessarily involve bad apples? And this was actually an important distinction for me, because if we think about Enron as being a problem of bad apples, then we say to ourselves, let's just make sure we never hire bad apples again. But if we think about it as something more systematic, more general, then maybe we can't prevent hiring bad apples. Maybe we can't really help it, and we need to think differently about the whole system of how we're going to create organizations. So to look into this, I basically did a very simple experiment. And to imagine that you're part of the experiment, imagine that you're sitting in a room and I pass you a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems. These are math problems where you have a set of 12 numbers and you have to find 2 numbers that add to 10. Very simple. You have 20 of those sets and you have 5 minutes to solve it, and I'll pay you $1 for each question you solve correctly. I pass to you the sheet. I say you have 5 minutes, $1 per question, go. Feverishly, you work hard, you try to find as many as you can. 5 minutes are over, you count how many questions you got correctly, because when you find 2 numbers that add to 10, you know you did it. You give me the sheet, I give you money. It turns out our subjects, participants, got 4 problems, they got $4. Okay. Now imagine the condition is slightly different. I pass you the sheet of paper, and when the 5 minutes are over, I say, stop, tear your sheet of paper, put the pieces in your pocket or in your backpack, and tell me how many questions you got correctly. Now you have a chance to cheat. What do you think would happen? Now the average response goes up to 6. Right? So people cheat, but when you look at the distribution of how many questions people claim to have solved, it's not as if we get bad apples. Instead, we get lots and lots of people who cheat just by a little bit. So now the question is, why do people cheat, and why do they cheat just by a little bit? The rational model of cheating is very simple. You do a cost-benefit analysis. Every time you pass by a gas station, you ask yourself, how much money is in the till? What will I get if they catch me? And what's the probability that they will catch me? And based on that, you decide to steal or not to steal. It's a simple trade-off. So we played with that. We said, what if we change the amount of money people stand to gain from cheating? We paid some people 10 cents per correct question, 25 cents, 50 cents, $1, $2, $5, $10. You'd expect that cheating would go up as the amount that they would stand to gain from cheating would go up, but it didn't. People cheated just the same way. Lots of people cheated just by a few questions, and they cheated to the same level regardless of how much money they were standing to gain. What about the probability of being caught? We tried that as well. We got some people to shred half the sheet of paper, so there was some evidence left. Some people shred the whole sheet of paper, so there was no evidence. Some people shred the whole sheet, they left the room and paid themselves from a ball of money that have over $100. You'd expect people would cheat more as the probability of being caught got down. They did not. Lots of people cheated just by a little bit. So the economic, rational trade-off between cost and benefit doesn't seem to hold here. So we thought maybe what's happening is that we have these 2 goals. We want to look at ourselves in the mirror and think of ourselves as good people. That's one goal. The second goal is we want to benefit from cheating. Now, under usual circumstances, you would say, how could you get both of those? But maybe our psychology is sufficiently flexible that if we cheat just a little bit, we could benefit from cheating and we can think of ourselves as good people. So think of it as a fudge factor. It's the level in which you can cheat and still feel good about yourself. and just go back to the time when you filed your taxes, and this will come back to you in terms of what it means. Now, how would you test something like this? We wanted to do two things. We wanted to shrink the fudge factor to get people to cheat less, and to expand the fudge factor to get people to cheat more. So to get people to cheat less, we basically came up with an idea based on a little joke. And the joke is that a guy goes to the rabbi, and he said, "Rabbi, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. Somebody stole my bicycle from synagogue." And the rabbi said, "This is terrible. Somebody stealing the bike from synagogue, this is awful. Here is what you do. Next time you come to synagogue, sit in the front row. And when we go over the 10 Commandments, look back at everybody else. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who bashfully looks down, who can't stare you in the eyes. And this is your guy." The rabbi is very excited with his idea, so is the guy. After next services, he catches him and says, "So, how did it work?" And the guy said, "You wouldn't believe. It worked like a charm. The moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike." Now you're wondering what kind of experiments are we doing, but so we got a big group of students, about 500 UCLA students into a room, and we asked half of them to remember 10 books they read in high school. We asked the other half to remember the 10 Commandments. By the way, in our sample, nobody could remember all 10 Commandments, and people invented lots of new ones. And then we tempted them to cheat. The people who thought about 10 books cheated just the same as everybody else. The people who thought about the 10 Commandments did not cheat at all. Now, it wasn't as if the people who remembered more commandments, the more religious ones, cheated less, and the less religious people, the people who remembered fewer commandments, cheated more. Nobody, after thinking about the 10 Commandments, ended up cheating. So that's kind of a curious idea. So we said, it's kind of hard to get the 10 Commandments into regular life. What about the honor code? So we got people to sign. I understand that this survey falls under the MIT honor code. They signed it. They shredded a piece of paper. No cheating whatsoever. And no cheating whatsoever, despite the fact that MIT doesn't have an honor code. So they were just signing it. Now, we ran this experiment at Princeton. I'm actually going to give a talk tomorrow at Princeton. I'm going to tell them the results. We'll see how they like it. We ran the experiment at Princeton. Princeton has a very strong honor code. They give the freshmen a week-long educational treatment of honesty. They have lectures and series. The a cappella group even have a song about the honor code. We waited 3 weeks after this initial training, and then we tempted the Princeton student to cheat. What do you think? Did they cheat less? Did this week-long training, crash course on honesty, did anything to their morality? Nothing. They cheated just the same. So this is kind of a mixture of good news, bad news. The bad news is if you try to do a week-long crash course on honesty, the odds that you will be successful is very low. At least Princeton was not able to do it. The good news is that if you tempt people, if you remind people at the right time about their own morality, there's less likelihood that they will cheat. So it's very hard to create cultural change. It's very easy to create a change at the moment of temptation. We took this idea, by the way, to the IRS, and we said, look, all your forms, people fill them in, and then they sign at the bottom. By that time, you finish cheating. It's over, right? There's no effect. What if you signed first, right? You signed first. I declare that everything I say here will be truthful and so on. And they said, well, legally, you can't really sign up front. So I said, what about if you sign both up front and at the back? They said, well, it's too complex. So I said, what if the first item on the tax return is going to say, would you donate $25 to a task force to fight corruption? Now, if people say yes, they not only thought about their own honesty, they've also committed some money toward it, and they'll be more honest. And besides, we said if they say no, you can audit them. Anyway, they didn't want to play with us, but we got an insurance company to do this experiment with us. This is an insurance company that mails people a letter asking them to tell us how many miles did you drive last year. So we got 20,000 form. Some people got a form that asked them to fill the mileage and then sign. Some people got a form that asked them to sign first and then fill the number. The people who signed first reported to be driving 2,700 miles more per year, 15% more. Now think about it. Just changing the line of the signature gets people top of their mind how much they care about honesty, and changes in 15% how much people cheat. Okay, so all this was about getting people to cheat less. Next, we wanted to get people to cheat more. Not that this is kind of an objective for life, right? We have enough of it, but for the experiments, let's see how we can do it. So let me tell you about 3 experiments. Experiment 1, I walk around MIT and I distribute 6 packs of Cokes in the refrigerators. These are kind of dorm refrigerators, that the refrigerator is common, but everybody has their own food. And I come back from time to time and I measure what we call the half-lifetime of Coke, right? And anybody who's been a student knows that Coke doesn't last very long. And then what you compare it to? So in the same refrigerator, I put a plate with 6 $1 bills, and I measure how long does it take anybody to take my dollar bills. Nobody ever took a single dollar bill. Now, the student could have taken a dollar bill, could have gone to a Coke machine, could have gotten Coke and change, but it feels very differently. Right? It actually feels very different to take Coke and money. There's not a little joke on this that says that little Joey come back from school with a note from the teacher that said that little Joey stole a pencil from the kid who was sitting next to him. And Joey's father is furious. And Joey, I'm so embarrassed and humiliated. You never, never, never steal a pencil from anybody. You have 3 weeks of curfew, and we'll see what happens when your mother comes. And besides, Joey, if you need a pencil, just ask. You can always ask, and I can bring you at least a dozen of pencils from work. Now, why is this kind of amusing? Because we all, I think, have the intuition that we will have a very hard time taking 10 cents from a petty cash box, but taking a pencil is somehow easier. Now, the Coke experiment is not exactly a great experiment because you often find Coke in refrigerators. You don't often find plates of money in refrigerators. So we went back to our sheet experiment I described earlier, and we had 3 groups. Group 1 got it, they solved 4. Group 2 solved it, tore it up, came to us and said, Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X dollars. They claimed to have solved 3 more problems. The third group, when they shredded a piece of paper, they said, Mr. Experimenter, I solved such and such number of problems, give me such and such number of tokens. We paid them in pieces of plastic. They walked 12 feet to the side and exchanged it for dollars. And now the question is, would having something in terms of tokens, cheating for something that is 1 step removed from money for a few seconds, will get people to cheat more? In our experiments, people double their cheating. And this actually troubles me a great deal, because if you think about being removed 1 step from money for a few seconds, getting people to cheat more, what does it mean about backdating stock options? What does it mean about things that are multiple steps removed from money for longer duration? Could it be that somebody who will never dream about cheating in cash could nevertheless cheat in millions of dollars when it's multiple steps removed from money? The last experiment I want to tell you about is what we call the Madoff experiment. We actually came up with it before Madoff was convicted, but still, it's a good name. Imagine you're in the experiment that I described earlier with 2 changes. Change number 1, I prepay you, so you get all your money up front in an envelope. Change number 2, I hire an acting student who stands up 30 seconds into the experiment and says, Mr. Experimenter, I solved everything, what do I do next? You are still working on problem number 1 out of 20. Somebody is standing and saying they solved everything. And the experimenter said, you solved everything, go home. And they go home. Now, what will happen to your own morality if you saw somebody cheat in an egregious way? Hence the name the Madoff experiment, right? What will happen to you? Well, lots and lots of more people cheat. But there are 2 possible reasons. One is we just proved to you that in this experiment you can cheat and get away with it. The cost-benefit analysis. Hey, nothing bad happened. Here is an example, somebody cheat and goes away with it. The other explanation is that now you think that it's okay in society to cheat. You've revised your opinion about what is an acceptable fudge factor. All of a sudden you say, hey, cheating is kind of fine. I see other people doing it. It must be okay. Social justification. How would you separate those 2 theories? The way we did it was we played with the outfit of the acting student. We ran this experiment at Carnegie Mellon, Pittsburgh. All the students were Carnegie Mellon students, and the acting student was a Carnegie Mellon student. They have a very good acting school. In the experiment I told you about, he was wearing a Carnegie Mellon sweatshirt. Everybody thought he was one of the crowd. In the other experiment, he was wearing a University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. Now, if you know anything about university rivalry, right, these are kind of, we don't think of them as immoral people, but, they're not like us necessarily. What would happen now? When the student was wearing University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt, he proved in the same way that you can cheat and get away with it. But he didn't give any social justification. And now cheating actually went down. It went down to below the level that when nobody stood up and demonstrated that in this experiment you can cheat and get away with it. So what is happening here? What is happening is that when we have somebody from our in-group cheating, we feel more comfortable cheating. When it's somebody from the out-group who said, oh, cheating is involved here, I don't want to cheat, and besides, it's these other bad people who are cheating, I don't want to be involved in that, and therefore we become more honest. So as a closing thought, I want to tell you, what does this have to say about the economy? This whole story is really a story about conflict of interests. Imagine that you were a stockbroker or a financial raters or anything of that sort, and I paid you $8 million to view mortgage-backed security as a good product. Wouldn't you be able to do it? Right? Not because you're a bad person, just because you're a person. It turns out that conflict of interest really shade the way we see things dramatically. I don't think you'll be able to see something from being awful to wonderful, but you'll be able to see it as slightly better than you would do without the $8 million. Now, what happens if it's hard to compute? It's fuzzy. It's not clear, like the tokens. Wouldn't you use some of the parameters and formulas and equations to shade your opinion even more? Of course you would. And what will happen next if you see everybody around you behaving in the same way? And on top of that, you believe that everybody is smart because you know economics and you know that other people are rational and so on. Wouldn't you be able to even shade your opinion more? I think that's basically what happened. We took good people from the majority part, we put them in a situation of terrible incentives. And they ran amok and almost destroyed the economy, or destroyed the economy, depends how you look at it. And I think that unless we learn this lesson and try to do things differently, there's just going to be another type of catastrophe. And what we really need to understand is that this financial crisis that started from a particular kind of lending, that's not the symptom. The symptom is really this wishful blindness that people have and our inability to stand when we have conflict of interest. And if we get this, I think we can move forward. My time is up. Thank you very much.